and we represent over 8,500 Jewish students across the UK and Ireland. As part of my role as a sabbatical officer, I focus on Holocaust education. Earlier this year, we helped to bring Holocaust education to over 40 campuses across the UK and Ireland, all unique and all peer-led by students. It has been a pleasure to be a part of the Yom HaShoah online commemoration and educational day, and it is even more of an honour to run my session as part of it. When we run this session on campus, our students are there to understand and relate to the testimonies that they hear. This session is very interactive, and this is a summarised session of what we would be presenting on campus. If you would like to engage with this session, you can follow along on a link. The link is www.ujs.org.uk/YHS. So this session is run with students, and as we're showing the student perspective, it wouldn't be the same without having some students from some of our campuses that we represent on the live stream with us. With us on this live stream, we have Ashley Hayward, Olivia Fletcher, Talia Noble-Gershon, and Josh Mercer, and Alex Bollott. They're all joining us today to help us run this session. Within this session, this is a summary version of what we would like to do. And if you would like to join in, you can join in the comments or through the website and run it alongside yourself. We have invited the 4 students to read 4 testimonies, and they will be split into originally be split into themes of 4, but for this purpose, they will be read and discussed. The first testimony that will be read will be from Lily Ebbett, read by Ashley. Just want to unmute your microphone, you can read it. If you'd just like to read the testimony there, and then we can.
Lily Ebbett was a young girl living in Hungary when the Nazis came to her town. Lily and her family were ordered to pass over all of their belongings to the Nazis. However, she hid a tiny gold pendant in her mother's shoe. From her hometown, she and her family were deported to Auschwitz in 1944 in cattle carts, where she experienced a selection process where she and 2 of her sisters were sent to the right and therefore was able to live another day. Lily was transferred to an ammunition factory near Leipzig after 4 months in Auschwitz until she was liberated in 1945. Lily managed to keep the pendant in her shoe till the end of the war, became a symbol of her happy childhood and defiance against the Nazis. I promised myself if by some miracle I survived, I will tell the world what happened here. I will teach the youngsters that something so terrible should never be forgotten or ever happen again. I've kept that promise.
Thank you for reading Lily Ebbett's testimony. We are going to go through all 4 testimonies and then a question at the end, which will then be discussed. So the next testimony that will be read will be of Heinz Skyt by Olivia Fletcher, who I think is having technical difficulties. So if Alex, if you would like to read Heinz's story instead on behalf of her, it should come up on the screen for you.
Heinz Skyt was born in 1920 in Fürth near Nuremberg, Germany. Heinz left school at 16 as he was no longer accepted by his peers, and due to the Nuremberg laws, he could no longer go to university. At 18, Heinz went to Hamburg to learn English. One day, he got a call from his mother telling him to leave his house and that his father had gone away. He had been arrested. This was Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. When returning home, his neighbour told him that the Gestapo came for him. If he was at home, he would have been sent to a concentration camp. This saved his life. Heinz and his family then made plans to leave Germany and go to Leeds, UK. Yet in England, he was registered as an enemy alien and was sent to internment camps in Canada for 2 years, and eventually was released in 1942 returned to Leeds. He never did get the chance to fight the Nazis as he wished. As a child of any age, to be excluded from your peers is a blow. You feel inferior and you question your existence.
Thank you, Alex. We're going to move on to the next testimony now, which is Terry Farago, which will be read by Talia.
Terry Farago was 17 when she was taken to Auschwitz. In March 1942, Terry had to stop going to school in Budapest, Hungary, as her family were worried that she would be taken by the Germans. This was around a year before they were taken to a ghetto. Terry and Emily were then taken out of the ghetto and marched to a quarry near Budapest. They were there for 3 days until they were taken to Auschwitz and Terry faced a selection process. She soon realized her family were no longer behind her and began shouting for them. She was told they were okay by a German guard. As she waited for her family to arrive, another inmate told her what had happened, but it took her a while to believe what was true. Terry was moved from Auschwitz to another concentration camp and spent 11 months living in cramped conditions until she realized the Nazis had left the camp and the gates were unlocked. She realized she was now free. I think this is practically unbelievable that people would be so cruel. We were treated like animals and even they were handled better. It was so cruel and painful even to look back, and I think that it should be in history so it will never be repeated again.
Thank you, Talia. We're going to move on to the fourth testimony, which will be read by Josh, and it is the testimony of Alec Ward.
Alec Ward lived in Magnunes in Poland. When war broke out, the Germans imposed impossible restrictions and he saw horrific acts. He was later moved to a ghetto where he would smuggle out to try and get cigarettes to sell within the ghetto walls. Upon instruction to move to another ghetto, Alec's father ordered him and his brother to escape. Alec and his brother fled and lived in fields until they joined a group of Jewish prisoners who were irrigating land. Alec was then taken to his first labor camp where he witnessed the death of his brother. Alec travelled from labor camps to work camps to concentration camps where Alec endured grueling work and terrible conditions. Alec was liberated from Mauthausen concentration camp on the 5th of May 1945. Music was a consistent part in Alec's life, from singing at synagogue to singing in the ghetto to attract customers. During roll call at his time in Buchenwald concentration camp, classical music was played. Music did not remind him of the camps, but became a great love of his. In spite of what you've heard me tell you, I implore you not to hate the Germans or any other people, as it was hatred that caused the Holocaust in the first place. Had I lived with hatred in my heart for the last 60-odd years, I would not be here today.
Thank you, Josh. These are only 4 testimonies from the Holocaust that we have chosen here to read today. From this and the other testimonies that people have heard on campus and previously, we then move on to a question section, which if you would like to join in and share your thoughts, you may do so. You can also access their full stories on the webpage that I will re-show you later on. Here are some questions that we are going to begin to discuss. We're going to start by looking at the general questions and sort of discuss them. Alex, if you'd like to share your thoughts on perhaps some of the testimonies that you have read, that we have read just now.
Okay, so firstly I read.
If anyone would like.
Sorry, 1 second. So when I initially read Terry's testimony, like I was initially kind of shocked by like the obviously like traumatic story and like the loss of her family, etc., and like just the kind of how briefly it was described and like how like matter of fact it was, where obviously there's a lot of like emotional pain there. So like, yeah, obviously it's a really traumatic series of events, and it's just quite striking how matter of fact it was.
No, definitely, and I think these are very much summaries of each survivor's testimony, and this definitely takes away a lot of the emotion that you would hear when you hear from a survivor themselves. I think from hearing their stories, have any of you had any thoughts or messages that we can take away from their stories and pass on to other people on campus and in other situations? Anyone can join in these parts.
So for me, I think it's really to see that these people who went through one of the worst things you could imagine are the most forgiving people that you've ever seen talk. That's something that's always like struck me when reading testimonies or watching them, that these people are the most forgiving people ever. And I think forgiveness is really important just for yourself to get over trauma in your life. If you're able to forgive the people that caused it, they no longer hold, like, they no longer hold you, they no longer control how you feel. And I think like incredible to sort of take away from that, that these people who lived in fear for their life, watched their loved ones die, yet they can still forgive. I think that's incredible.
Building on from that, it seems that Alec's message, the sort of takeaway from his story, is that part of the whole never again philosophy is the idea of not treating people with the same sort of hatred that Jews experienced. So I think part of that is built into the idea that to truly commit to this never happening again, you can't respond with hatred.
No, definitely. I think Alec definitely leaves us with thoughts of hope and
Yeah,
carry on. So he definitely leaves us with thoughts of hope, and sort of his remaining love for music definitely shows us that through the trauma that he experienced, he's turned this into something that is in his past, and he's created such a positive future for himself and with grandchildren and great grandchildren that he has, and he built a great life for himself after all of the trauma that he went through. I know someone before had something to say.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I think a big message is just the idea, like built on from the other two, like tolerance and just accepting like people for who they are, and also building on the fact like not treating anyone the way we have been treated is also like something to take away from like all these learners, and to never forget their message is to like truly immerse ourselves in social action, and to like make sure that if we see people on campus who you think are being abused because of their race, their sexuality, or anything, you make sure to stand up for them, because like we like from like generations from our family and people we know the feeling of having no one to stand up for us. So I think it's important for us to play our part, even if they're not like our immediate friends or people we know. Like it doesn't matter, you just like do what's right.
I think it's definitely interesting when we talk about bringing the testimonies back to campus and standing up for what's right and standing up in the face of prejudice and discrimination. In terms of bringing it back to campus, are there any of these stories or understanding what can we learn about ourselves from these stories that we could then bring back onto campus?
I think lots of anti-Semitism comes from a place of lack of understanding and lack of education around the Holocaust. So I think being able to sort of share these stories, not just with other Jewish students, but with the wider student community, helps to prevent anti-Semitic tendencies, especially around the Holocaust.
When looking at different ways to educate on campus, in your opinions, what do you think is the most effective? Obviously, hearing first-hand testimonies from survivors is incredibly important and something that should take precedent. But I was wondering what your thoughts were on this and how we can bring these stories into ways that will gauge and bring people to.
I was just going to say, I think, well, I'll speak about something that happened at Uni of Birmingham. We had a Holocaust survivor come in, and I brought one of my non-Jewish friends to go hear the talk, and she was so like moved by it, and she found it so incredible. Like I was her first Jewish friend ever, and like she was learning so many new things. But I know obviously like that's very difficult because like that's not always accessible, like having a Holocaust survivor come. So just like teaching them more about your culture and like where you've come from, in essence. Even like a small thing of starting like bringing them to interfaith Friday night dinners to understand the community, and then that like can move on slowly but surely, because it is quite a difficult topic, so that can move on slowly and surely to more like intense topics like the Holocaust, and just like understanding it like through like showing them videos and like telling them about your family history. And also like a way to do it is to sort of like discuss, although they might not be Jewish, their family might be refugees, or they might have something in similar like that's happened to them. So it's just like trying to make them understand it, because I know a lot of my non-Jewish friends just don't know a lot about it. So it's just like bringing like the awareness around the situation.
I also think like, oh, sorry, go on. I think like even looking at testimonies like this, like even if it's not possible to hear a Holocaust survivor speak, like looking at written accounts really helps like contextualize the Holocaust, because often when it's just like spoken of as like a historical event, it's really hard to like kind of get a grasp of like the individual in it. And it's just, I think testimonies and just like looking at different stories and like different like representations of the Holocaust, so maybe like in films and books and stuff, is really useful in the sense of like getting a grasp of like the individual stories within that.
For me, I'm really into drama, and I'm going to be doing a degree in applied theatre, and I think it's really interesting, the prospect of using theatre to encourage people to talk about things, to explore things. And I think it's really it would be a really way to dig a bit deeper into the testimonies, to have sort of explore the emotions behind them, and like how the stories affect them. I think drama is a really great tool for a lot of things, and yeah, I think doing some sort of drama project, whether that has a show at the end or not, I think that would be really helpful and really useful as a tool to sort of explore and understand that when you learn it like in history class, it seems really far away. It seems really, I don't want to say not real, but it feels like it's not tangible. You can't sort of understand you can't understand how it felt. And I think drama like has a means to help people understand it in that way.
I think also it's really important that sort of second generation survivors become more involved. So, you know, obviously there are fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors with us every year. And second generation survivors, people like my uncle, who go to places and deliver talks, really sort of help give it home, bring it home when the survivors, you know, can't tell their stories anymore. I think that's really powerful on campus, especially. I've seen some very good talks.
I think definitely from that, there are a lot of students out there that are third descendants, fourth descendants of Holocaust survivors that share their stories on campus and help to educate their peers on what they're doing. I'm sure that many of you have heard maybe some of your peers talk about, and many of you watching who have heard some of their peers talk about their family history, which coming from Jewish societies, which is very interesting to hear your friends talk about it. And I was wondering, when you're on campus and you have these discussions within your societies and within your friend groups, both Jewish and non-Jewish, I was wondering what sort of conversations do you have that sort of tailor to this? And again, if anyone online has any questions that they'd like to put in, please feel free to put it in the comments. I think it's also quite interesting if we go back to the idea of drama and we talk about how the Holocaust is represented in modern interpretations. I think that is a very interesting topic. And I was wondering, we've spoken about drama, but sort of their representation in modern film and theatre and music. And I was wondering whether you had any thoughts on that, any of you, if you'd like to try and.
Yeah, I think like often theatre and film can sometimes like maybe not portray the Holocaust accurately, and like there've been loads of cases where people have like written about films or books about the Holocaust and said like this is like a dramatization of what happened, or it's not factually correct. But like that discussion is in itself like quite useful in terms of like facilitating dialogue about the Holocaust. And I think even if a film or a book isn't necessarily super historically accurate, it's a good starting point for discussion like in the wider community of how like the Holocaust is portrayed, like how is it fair to portray, to what extent can you like fictionalize it, and like that's a good starting point for discussion, I think.
I think as well, just as we were sort of saying before, words on a page and numbers can feel detached in many ways. They are just words, and it can be very difficult to connect that to so many lives and so many stories. So I think seeing films in particular, I've shown non-Jewish friends of mine films, and it has really brought the Holocaust home for them. So I think that is particularly powerful when trying to put across the personal stories. I think that's really important.
I've had some interesting conversations with some of my non-Jewish friends about it. Like in my close friendship group on my politics course, quite a lot of them like have Jewish relations or are like half Jewish, and in fact know a lot about the Holocaust, like have family members from it, and maybe like they like became Christian after, but they're not Jewish now. But I've had some interesting conversations, and also for one of my friends, like widening horizons, a lot of them do Holocaust historiography, which I don't do because I just can't do that module, but they find it really interesting, and like I'm always like hearing about it. And I just think like sometimes it's just like opening up the conversation, like actually they are so willing to learn, especially my friends, about it. Like I know some of them were saying like their school took a few of them to like Auschwitz, like they know what's happened. And like it's just about like not so much like educating them because they might know a lot, but sort of if they don't know a lot, educating them, but if they already do, sort of making it more personal and like speaking about like stories you've heard and things. I mean, I say this, but I've also had an experience the other day where someone that I was friendly with put something on their Snapchat story saying, "Can't believe we got away in our sixth form show with doing a Nazi salute." And I was absolutely astonished. I was like, I did not think this would happen from this person. So I think it's just, yeah, you can be astonished by things sometimes. Definitely.
I think especially with contemporary issues and what's happening on campuses and what we're aware of happening today, it's so important that we have these discussions and showing our student perspective to the wider world to sort of see what we face with and what we see and how we can actually make a difference. So I think looking at all of these contemporary issues and talking with your friends on campuses, how can we then make a difference using the stories and the lessons that we have learned from the Holocaust to make these difference in the present times on campus? I think from a lot of times that this session has been run on campus, a lot of students talk about these issues, such as what you were saying in the school, of what they've seen on campus and this prejudice and discrimination, and how they've used their knowledge of what they've learned from these sort of sessions and helped to stand up for what they believe in. And I think bringing these Holocaust education sessions onto campus are incredibly vital in doing this. Bringing these on and making a difference in present times, what ways do you think that we can accomplish this on campus? What do you think we can do to make this difference?
I think like
after you.
Sorry, thanks. I think like just whether it's informal or formal discussions, just really like raising awareness through like just talking about it and like kind of just introducing it as a topic. And I think like often like whether like through like a variety of sessions or like formats, and I think it's just important to like keep talking about it. I think it's like the most important thing about education is like I know like the consistency of it and like making sure that like it's a thing that's talked about and like discussed, and like maybe like organizing events around particular like films or books or like topics. And I think that'd be really important to like help spread the word on campus.
I agree. I think that there are a whole plethora of mediums that can help just keep the conversation going around the Holocaust, keep awareness there, help educate around anti-Semitism. I think that that can come through a whole host of things. Any form of art, and then you've got on the other end of the scale, survivors and secondary survivors coming in and giving their accounts and their family history. So I think lots of it is sort of down to individual students as much as it is down to bodies like UJS just keeping the conversation going on campus and with people.
I was going to say, I think obviously it's a bit less accessible this year because we're online, but like societies, like having a role like your student newspaper, your student radio, like if you have someone that like knows about the topic, sort of like pushing that forward. Like I'm really involved in student radio, so if we were there right now, I'd probably like want to do something on it. So yeah, just ensuring that it's not just like obviously like UJS and JSOT does an amazing job, but ensuring that it's also taken to more of like a wider platform, so that lots of different societies, regardless of like if people are Jewish in society or not, can like have access to it, because that can be sort of a way to bring like your love of your society whilst also learning something new together, which can have like a good mix and a good education.
I think on that, it's definitely important to talk about all of the incredible work that was planned to be done for Yom HaShoah on campuses across the UK and Ireland. And I think that even in these tough circumstances, there are a lot of students that are making a massive effort to still continue this within their societies and outside of their societies to ensure that we can educate as many people as we can. And I think it's really important to note that it is the job and the responsibility of us all to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten and that we can pass on these testimonies. I think on that, I thought it'd be quite important to raise a study that I found, which was in 2018, that found that 2 out of 3 millennials didn't know what Auschwitz was. And I think, is that a product of people becoming desensitized, or what do you think about this and how we can educate to make this difference? We've spoken quite a lot about what we can do on campus, but I think it's still statistics like this one that make us even more enthused to ensure that we can bring this Holocaust education onto campus. And I think maybe we could discuss the thoughts around desensitization, and what are your thoughts around that?
I think desensitization is.
I do think that further we.
After you.
Oh, do you want to go first?
No. After you, go on.
I think that the further we get away from what happened, the harder we have to work to make sure that it isn't desensitized, because the further away in history it gets, the more detached that people can feel. Because I know for me, it feels like so long ago, even though it wasn't really that long ago. It feels almost impossible to sort of reach that time period. So I think the more we go away from that, like in time, the harder we have to work to make sure that it isn't desensitized, because I feel like when it's desensitized, then you're less likely to be able to recognize it or something similar that's happening now, because there's a lot of things going on in the world now, not just for Jewish people, that are like atrocities, and I feel like people are so desensitized to the Holocaust that those atrocities don't seem as bad as they really are. So that's what I want to say.
I think also, along with being overexposed to it, perhaps there's also, I think there's an element that, words and numbers on a page don't really, after a while, tend to mean that much. As someone who's sort of studied the Holocaust at university, there's an amazing amount of sort of apathy towards just the sort of 6 million number. So I think methods of bringing home the sort of personal personal accounts are the really important and sort of emotional ones. I think they help really sort of bring home that those 6 million are all individuals, all with their own stories, all with their own lives. And I think that's why the individual memorial candles are such a poignant memorial. I think that, you know, things like that, to remember different individuals, I think really sticks with people and sort of helps get over that potential overexposure.
I think on that as well, and how we can going on what you said, Josh, about personal stories. I was wondering if any of you had any personal responses that you'd like to share. I know I don't mean to pick on you, Josh, but I know you've done a lot of work looking into your family story, and I think it'd be great to share that with the people watching this live stream.
Yeah, I'll happily talk about my family story. So my family were originally from Poland, and they emigrated to Germany in the early 1900s. They were actually the only Jewish family on their road, so they were very much outside of the community. And their youngest son, it was a family of 5, I believe. Their youngest son grew up and ended up emigrating to Switzerland. And he kept in very close contact with his 2 closest sisters named Miriam and Hedwig. Miriam had a very young 5-year-old daughter around the time that the Nazis got into power. Izzy, who was the youngest, who had moved to Switzerland, maintained very close contact with these 2 sisters. And in 1938, he realized the direction after Kristallnacht, the direction that the Nazis were headed in with their treatment of Jews. So he decided to return to Germany in an attempt to save his sisters. Unfortunately, he was only able to save one of the 3. He managed to save Miriam's daughter, my grandmother, who was one of 10,000 Jewish children to be sent to the UK on the Kindertransport. Sadly, his 2 sisters were moved around a number of ghettos and camps, and they are presumed lost. Izzy was fortunate enough to survive Auschwitz, and after which he emigrated to Australia. Amazingly, he managed to keep a diary for 3 years during his time interned at various labor camps, which I have been endeavoring to translate and study this year. So it's a remarkable story, and I often have said that around the time of Holocaust Memorial, I like to reflect on the tremendous bravery that Izzy demonstrated by returning into sort of the dragon's den, if you will, and attempt to save his family.
I think it's such an incredible story, and thank you for sharing it. I think that to show that your effort to try and translate these stories, I think, is also inspiring in itself, to show this want to know more and what people on campus are doing to sort of try and understand not just general history, but their own history, which I think is incredible to see. And I was wondering if anyone else had any stories that they'd like to share about their engagement with Holocaust education. I think we all hear so many stories on campus, and we interact so deeply with all of these studies. And I think this personal and emotional aspect that we all sort of connect with helps us create this feeling of wanting to do more on campus and to help educate and to help understand through these different ways. And I think it is incredible that the work that you do, all of you, with Holocaust education and the importance we all place on it. I mean, this is just the beginning of the discussion that we're having, and we've come up with so many thoughts on what we can do and how we can make changes and understand different stories, both personal and more public, and how we can hold the memories of those that unfortunately perished in our hearts and help to educate more and stand up against prejudice and discrimination on campus. I think thinking of your time on campus, obviously, in the current situation many of us aren't. I was wondering if there was anything that you'd like to add or anything you'd like to sort of air. I know, Josh, that you've spoken about your remarkable story, and I think it's incredible. I was wondering if anyone else would like to add or share some of their testimonies.
I don't know too much about my family in particular. I feel like it's been spoken about a bit, but not too much. I know that when my grandpa's Israeli, so when he lived in Israel, his auntie came over, but I don't think it was really spoken about that much. I think in Israel there was a lot of shame to do with the Holocaust survivors, which I've read a lot about. So I don't know too much. I know most of my grandpa's family didn't survive, but one auntie did move to Israel where he was living. But I had the opportunity in the summer of 2018. I went to a Jewish summer, like a BBYO Jewish summer camp, like an American summer camp in Pennsylvania. And for a weekend, they had Holocaust survivors come, and you could apply to be their grandchildren for the weekend. So I had a lady called Hannah Dooch who was from, I think it was Austria. I'm not exactly sure, but she was on the kinder transport to England. And when she was in England, she went to the Isle of Man, and then later on she registered to become a nurse and fought in the British Army, and had such an incredible opportunity that weekend. And I still email her regularly. She's 99, she's in quarantine, she doesn't want to go outside, she has all her food. And yeah, I think it's just about getting those personal connections, and having the opportunity was so incredible. And one of the main, because I was looking back at the photos and videos last night because I wanted to do an Instagram about her, which I've done. One of the main things she said in one of the clips I found of her speaking was about education, how important education is, education for ourselves and what we're interested in, but also the educating others on the Holocaust. And that's really stayed with me since that summer a few years ago.
Yeah, I think just reading the testimonies now, it's just really moving into as I said before, contextualize the Holocaust. And I don't know too much about specific family members' involvement, but because it is quite filled with I don't know, it's almost something you don't really look back on too much. People try and kind of not really talk about too much because it's associated with so much pain and hurt. But yeah, looking at these testimonies now is it's quite inspiring to do more research and obviously reclaim that and get really involved in the narrative of it and investigate more.
I think definitely. I think the purpose of starting this session with the 4 testimonies is to sort of introduce you to stories that you may or may not have heard, and to sort of understand their stories and sort of delve into a discussion if you haven't had the opportunity to hear a survivor speak themselves. And I think from this conversation that we've had, I think that we've uncovered so many ideas and ways that we can bring this back onto campus, and so many thoughts that are so incredible to share with everyone that's been listening. And I think it really does show that the effort that the student community on campuses are putting into Holocaust education, and even into this difficult period where people aren't on campus, you're still coming together and discussing about the Holocaust and commemorating Yom HaShoah together. And through this incredible platform that Yom HaShoah UK provided, it's incredible to hear your thoughts. And I think as we begin to wrap up this session, I was wondering if you could leave the people that are listening and the people that are looking and want to hear the student perspective, they want to come in and hear this bird's eye view. I was wondering if you could leave them a message to say what you are all doing on campus and how you believe what you do on campus is doing. I love to conclude with your thoughts. I'd love to hear from each of you about this. So it only has to be a quick brief of what you'd like to leave the people listening.
So I'm doing work to help sort of promote my uncle's testimony. And I just want to say, I think it is the responsibility of every Jewish student to try and engage just with the people around them as a minimum. Just keep the conversation going and share testimony, share experiences, share stories wherever possible.
So I was obviously because of the coronavirus, like the trip, my like March for the Living trip has been delayed. Obviously, it's like kind of unfortunate, but there's nothing you can do. But I'm looking forward to hopefully going on that at some point and like spreading testimonies and like engaging in more discussions about it with like both Jewish and non-Jewish friends, like through like looking at accounts and also like books and films.
Yeah, I was also meant to go on the March to the Living, but hopefully go next year. And I'm looking forward to going and learning more about the topic, and also just like building on what everyone's said so far. Just the idea of educating people like in different ways through hearing testimonies and different personal accounts, and just making the topic more accessible. Something that we not only discuss on days like Yom HaShoah, but all around the year, to make sure that it doesn't get forgotten, and that although this day is so important, that it is something more accessible that's spoken about like on a more frequent note.
I was also supposed to go on a trip, so I'm looking forward to going to Auschwitz and sort of being able to really like feel what happened, so that when I talk about it in the future, I can actually talk with authenticity, because I don't like feeling like what I'm saying is just words. So I think for me personally, going on that trip, I'd be able to sort of talk confidence and more realness, I guess. Yeah.
I'd like to thank you all for coming on and being part of this discussion. Like I say, this conversation is ongoing and it's not something that will just stop, and it will continue for years. And I think you've shown everyone a really good perspective of what the student community feel like and how they approach Holocaust education on campus. This online processing session is available online if anyone would like to have a look through it and understand it. And feel free to email me or message me any questions and thoughts or anything you'd like to elaborate on. Again, on the UJS website, there is a bit more information about the Holocaust survivor stories if you'd like to read more about that. And please feel free to contact any of us. And thank you again to Yom HaShoah UK for letting us host this session and hosting an Americal Educational Day. So I'd like to thank you all, each one of you, and thank you for joining me in this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.